AgTech 360 discusses breakthrough technologies that are impacting growers, businesses, and consumers. Hear from industry and academic experts about what's on the horizon.
Welcome back to AgTech 360 as we continue our deep dive into nanotechnology in agriculture. Earlier this month, we heard from Dr. Grieger at NC State, and today I'm excited to be joined by Dr. Jason White from the Connecticut Agriculture Experiment Station. Jason is a leading voice in the field with decades of experience guiding research and global collaborations aimed at harnessing nanotech to improve farming and food systems. So Jason, I'm really looking forward to exploring this topic with you. Thanks so much for being on the pod.
Oh, thanks for the invitation. Looking forward to it.
What I'd like to do is kind of explore a little bit nanotech first, because some of the listeners may be somewhat unfamiliar with it. So could you kind of give us kind of a nanotech 101 and just explain what nanotechnology is and how broadly it's being applied in the field of agriculture?
Sure. So I think the way to think about this in its simplest sense for nanotechnology is that when something is at the nanoscale, it behaves differently. It has different properties. So if you have regular copper oxide, it behaves certain ways. But if you have copper oxide that is in the nanoscale, it actually has different physical, chemical, and biological properties. So what nanotechnology is really doing is taking advantage of the fact that when these materials are small, they're much more active and reactive, and that can be useful in communications like our cell phones, in medicine and health and a variety of other places. And what we've come to learn is that it actually can be really, really useful in agriculture. The idea here, well, the fundamental problem with a lot of conventional agriculture is that it's extremely inefficient. And what we know about nanotechnology is that when you work at that nanoscale, you can be much more precise about what you're doing. And that's how this all kind of started. That can we use nanotechnology just to be more precise in terms of how we deliver nitrogen or phosphorus or atrazine or any of a range of other things that a farmer is going to be putting in their soil and on their plants.
Great. So nanotechnology, like any new technology, there are people that are worried or people are excited about it, sometimes not without basis for either. But what are some of the things that you hear, or in terms of concerns or perhaps more optimism about the use of nanotech?
Yeah, so I think that's an excellent point, particularly with agriculture, because we don't want to be putting anything on in our food that's going to create a problem. I mean, it's our food. It's, we're ingesting it, our kids are ingesting it, and a lot of the concerns that I think I hear most frequently when I'm talking to the lay public have to do with, we're putting these strange small materials in our food, and we don't want that. It's going to cause some sort of toxicity or create some sort of hazard. I think there are instances of us doing that in the past. I mean, DDT was a pesticide that had some really useful insecticidal properties, but it was used far too frequently in far too many applications, and it created all sorts of problems. So I think that's a legitimate concern that people have. In terms of the flip side of that, you can think about the fact that we have moving pretty quickly towards 10 billion people on this planet. And conventional agriculture, the way we grow food now, which is a direct result of the Green Revolution, is not sustainable, and it will not be able to produce enough food to feed that number of people on the planet. So we need to really transform how we grow, distribute, and store food. And nanotechnology, if done appropriately, can actually be a really significant part of that.
Great. So before we get into your current research, let's just kind of talk about your background, because I know you've been working in this field for quite a long time. I mean, how long is it? How did you get into working in nanotechnology, and how has your perception of the technology evolved over time?
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting story. I was hired here as a staff scientist in 1997, here being the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station. And my initial research project was actually based on soil remediation of old pesticides and PCBs, because my PhD is in environmental toxicology. So basically, the fate and effects of toxic materials in the environment. And since I was at an ag experiment station, it was in agricultural environments. On about 2005, 2006, I started reading about engineered nanomaterials, making it into consumer products, things like textiles, putting nanoscale silver into socks and shirts so that it wouldn't, you could kill the bacteria that would cause smells, or into agrochemical formulations. And I started reading that, and I just thought that was the most terrible idea I've ever heard. I mean, I truly went back to the story of DDT, where we found a material that had a core beneficial use, and we just went nuts, and we started using it in many, many places we never should have been using it. And I just saw this engineered nanomaterials as kind of that same trend. I mean, if you want to flash forward, it's the PFAS story, right? So I actually set up a research program looking at the toxicity of nanomaterials. The field that was developing then was called nanotoxicology, but basically, what were all of the potential negative impacts that engineered nanomaterials could have in agriculture and food. So I submitted some grants, got some funding, got some postdocs, and we really set up this program trying to look at the toxicity of engineered nanomaterials, because that's what my training was in. I published my first paper in 2009 on that topic, and between, I'd say, 2009 and maybe 2015, we probably published 40 or 45 papers just looking at how these materials could negatively impact agricultural systems. But basically, the short story is that, what we discovered was that under certain circumstances, not only were some of these nanomaterials not toxic, but they actually could convey significant benefit to a plant. They could increase growth, vegetative growth. They could increase yield. They could increase photosynthetic output. And given what we were starting to see with global food insecurity and climate change making agriculture more difficult, we kind of, flipped the coin, turned it on its head, and started thinking about, okay, well, how can we use these nanomaterials for something really positive? How could we use them to address this growing food insecurity crisis? So it's not that we gave up the nanotoxicology part. In fact, it's a core part of everything we do, because if we can't use a nanomaterial to safely increase food production, then we shouldn't be doing it, right? So that's kind of how that turns. So now we've got these kind of parallel lines of investigation running that aren't really parallel. They're kind of, intermingled all along.
I mean, one of the things that you kind of bring to my mind is, from a regulatory perspective, how these products are being regulated, because I'm assuming that as the science has evolved, as per usual, the regulations will evolve following the science. So where are we in terms of regulation right now?
Yeah, so that's a complex question, not surprisingly, right? I guess maybe the first thing to think about is, where's the U.S. relative to other countries? And you have countries like China and India and Pakistan, where these materials, agrochemical formulations that include nanotechnology are in significant use. And then you have instances in the U.S. where there is some penetration of the market. There are some nanoscale agrochemicals out there. It's probably 1 or 2% of the market share if you looked at it, but it's handled on a case by case basis by EPA. And then you have places like the EU where there's still significantly more skepticism. So that's kind of the broad picture. In the U.S., there's two ways to consider it. There's nanotechnology in food is going to be regulated by EPA if you're talking about pesticides, fertilizers, and stimulants. But if you're talking about nanotechnology in pharmaceuticals, that's regulated by the FDA. And one of the things that we know is that nanomedicine, for example, nanotechnology in pharmaceuticals is a huge area of research development and actual use right now. And there's a lot of us actually who kind of view nanomedicine as a template for what we're doing in agriculture, because when you use nanotechnology in medicine, what you're trying to do is use nanotechnology to more precisely deliver a cargo, pharmaceutical, in a complex system to a very specific place, like a cancer cell in somebody's lungs or something like that. And a lot of us looked at that and looked at what we're doing in agriculture and kind of looked at it as a similar problem. I mean, what we're trying to do in agriculture is more precisely deliver a cargo in a highly complex system. Now, it's not a perfect comparison, but it's a place to start. And given what we knew about being able to safely use nanotechnology, a lot of us have really started moving in this direction.
The North Carolina Plant Sciences Initiative impacts lives through innovative applications and discoveries. By leveraging cutting-edge research and technology, we address global challenges related to agriculture, sustainability, and human health.
Jason, you kind of hinted a couple of times at some of the uses of nanotechnology in agriculture. I'd love to hear in a little bit more detail about either your research or what you've seen others do in terms of using this as some kind of delivery device and the benefits that you're seeing, for instance, towards crop productivity or resilience to climate change, or these types of very important areas of agricultural research.
Yeah, so our work actually started in disease systems. Farmers have to spray a significant amount of different types of pesticides, because if you pick a crop and there's 30 pests and pathogens that will attack it. So we started working in disease systems, fungal diseases, bacterial diseases, nematode diseases. But what we decided to do was not necessarily use nanotechnology to go after the pest or the pathogen. What we decided to do was to go after plant health. Because plants are like people. If that plant is not getting sufficient nutrients, then that plant is not going to be able to defend itself against disease. And you and I, it's relatively easy to get the nutrients we need. We just take a multivitamin. But plants can't do that. They're in soil, and the availability of nutrients in soil is very limited. Particularly if you need nutrients in the roots, you can't do foliar applications because all those nutrients stay in the shoots. So what we tried to do was to use nanotechnology to enhance plant nutrition. So could we use nanoscale forms of things like copper and selenium and boron and zinc and iron, magnesium, manganese, all of these micronutrients that plants have trouble getting enough of? Could we use those in nanoscale form to be more available, more active? And we published our first paper on that in 2016, and it turns out it works really, really well. So in this case, the nanoparticle is actually the nutrient itself. It's a nanoscale metal oxide or mesoporous silica or something like that. So we've been doing a lot of work in that space with different crops and different disease systems and different nanomaterials.
Looking to the future now, and maybe also talking about partnerships. I mean, I believe that you've been involved in a lot of national, international partnerships. You mentioned phosphorus, of course. Here at NC State, we have our STEP Center that is focused on the sustainability of phosphorus. Where are you seeing these kind of relationships across the world driving things forward? Have you seen interesting collaborative activity that's led to new discoveries, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's certainly, and maybe the easiest way to see the growth in the field is to look at the number of papers published each year. And I created this graph at one point last year, and it's like an exponential growth curve in terms of the number of papers published in this. And most of the growth is from areas outside of the US. So there's certainly robust interest in research right now in the US, but I would say the bulk of my collaborations are overseas, collaborating with well over a dozen groups in China, 4 or 5 groups in India. There's a collaboration with Singapore, and we're initiating a number of collaborations with groups in Africa. And what we're seeing is that the areas with the greatest interest in pursuing this research, and everybody does want to pursue it safely and sustainably, but the areas with the greatest interest are the areas that have the most people to feed, the areas that are having the most significant difficulty with food insecurity. And then the other way to think about it is in terms of climate change. Right here in the US, climate change is making agriculture more difficult. But there are certainly areas of the world where, the change in climate and everything that goes with that is making food production far, far more difficult. So it's those areas that I think that are being impacted most by those two factors, that more rapidly changing climate than predicted, and just a lot of people to feed. Those are the areas that I think have recognized, we need to be doing something completely different with agriculture.
Yeah, so from what you've said, it sounds to me like we're at a relatively early stage in the exploitation of this technology in agriculture, but also in other fields like medicine. If you fast forward 10, 20 years from now, where do you see us being? What do you believe the impact of the technology is likely to be? And what things should we be looking out for as we move forward in that direction?
Yeah, there's a lot of us who are completely convinced that we really need to, as I keep saying, transform the way we do agriculture. And nanotechnology, I think, will be a significant part of that. It's not the only part, though. I mean, there are other ways to increase food production that have nothing to do with nanotechnology. So one of the most exciting areas now is seeing the interplay between gene editing and nanotechnology, and how those two techniques can be used to enhance the activity of either one. Some of the most exciting work we're doing right now is around climate resilience, and the fact that you can, and a lot of it's around what we call ROS, or reactive oxygen species homeostasis. So when an organism is stressed, including you and me and a corn plant and everything else on the planet, that stress produces reactive oxygen species, oxidative radicals. And we have defense systems that deactivate those molecules before they cause damage. But if it's a lot of stress, those systems can't keep up. So what we've discovered, and we've been working with a couple of groups in the UK and China on this, is that you can actually stimulate a small amount of stress in a seed or a seedling. And you can do that by an exposure to nanoscale iron or manganese or copper or anything else. But at the right dose, that little bit of stress actually serves as a signal. And it's a signal that says to the plant, we need to upregulate all of our defense pathways. We need to be ready for stress that's happening. But what you're really doing is you're preparing that seed or seedling for a stress that's going to occur later. So what we've shown is we've done this with rice and rice blast. You can treat these seeds with nanoscale iron, for example, is what we did. Just a low concentration to upregulate all of these pathways. We've done all the omic, metabolomic, proteomic work to monitor the pathways. And then what you see is when you plant that rice seed and then grow it out for its life cycle, you can expose it to rice blast, you can expose it to high temperature and cold temperature, literally months later. And those primed seeds, those ones that were stimulated early on, they're much better able to handle the stress. So they have much greater resilience. And when you think about the stress, those are the stresses of climate change. So we're looking at this as a strategy to really generate some climate resilience that can help, not necessarily, the 5,000 acre corn farm in Iowa, but what about, the person who's got a quarter of an acre in central India, or, in Malaysia somewhere, because the materials that do this are nutrients, right? They're things that the grower has to give to the crop already. So it's all just a matter of timing of exposure and concentration and the form. And you can really kind of control what we call this ROS homeostasis to generate these resilient properties.
Exciting thoughts for the future. And I really appreciate you sharing some of your research, but some of your perspectives on this really exciting technology. Thank you, Jason.
AgTech 360 shares relevant news and breakthroughs with audiences across the globe. Stay connected and join the conversation by following NCPSI on social media.